Second consequence is that there is no reason to think that redefining marriage would stop here. And in fact, we now have 3 new words that describe the ways in which marriage activists would like to see marriage further redefined. And here, just think back. 20 years ago, maybe on this campus it wouldn't have been unthinkable, but in most America, 20 years ago, the phrase same-sex marriage was an oxymoron. If it's same-sex, it's not marriage. So 20 years ago, most Americans didn't really think that a same-sex marriage was even an ontological possibility. In the same way, now we have 3 new words that have been coined in prominent liberal publications, and to me, there is no logical reason, once you get rid of the male-female aspect, for why these further redefinitions don't simply follow like night follows day. So let me run through these briefly. The first is the term throuple. A throuple is a 3-person couple. You chop off the C and you add on a THR, throuple. And my co-authors and I came across this term in New York Magazine. New York Magazine is a fairly standard issue magazine of thought for New Yorkers. It's a left-leaning publication. And what's standard in New York today will become standard in the rest of America 20 years from now. And the argument here is that this is not a polygamous relationship. A polygamous relationship would be one man with this woman in a conjugal relationship, the same man with a different woman in a conjugal relationship, the same man with a third woman in a conjugal relationship. Here it's a group marriage. This is an instance of polyamory, many loves. And the idea here is the throuple, all 3 partners are married to each other. And polyamory can come in different sizes and shapes. You can have a foursome where they're all married to one another. Whereas the foursome I just mentioned, it's one man with 3 different women in 3 different conjugal relationships. The polyamorous relationship will just be a group marriage. And the general idea is that if marriage is just about an intense emotional union, where spouses have romantic feelings for each other and then pledge to take care of each other, they commingle assets, they live together, they enjoy economies of scale, and they love one another. So the other convenient but empty slogan is that love equals love. Why isn't the throuple in the same exact situation as the couple? And so if you go to court and say, we are suing for our marriage equality rights for the same-sex couple, on what basis would you deny marriage equality to the same-sex throuple or the opposite-sex quartet? Because the way that we arrived at monogamy in Western law and culture is that it's one man and one woman who can unite in the comprehensive act that produces new life, and every new life has one mother and one father. And marriage is about uniting those people into a stable family life. But once you say the male-female aspect of marriage is irrational and arbitrary and bigoted, what is magical about the number 2? What is the principled reason for denying marriage equality to 3s and 4s and more? So that's the throuple. The next term we came across was the term monogamish. And this was in the New York Times, in the Sunday magazine. There's probably no publication more prominent in terms of mainstream liberal thought than the New York Times Sunday magazine. And this was in a profile of the gay rights activist Dan Savage. And in a portion of that profile, the question was asked, what do you think straight couples will learn from gay couples once there's same-sex marriage? So how will gay marriage actually help traditional marriage? And he says, well, what it will teach and what straight couples could learn is the virtue of the monogamish relationship. The term monogamish is a play on the word monogamous. So Savage seems to be inclined to want to keep the twosome requirement, but he wants to get rid of the sexual exclusive requirement. He thinks that sexual exclusivity is outdated and inhumane. It's an unrealistic expectation to think that you could have all of your sexual needs fulfilled by one person for the rest of your life. And that this is what's wrong with heterosexual marriage. And that this is one of the things that heterosexuals could learn from homosexuals is the virtue of monogamish. And so he says that provided it's an open and honest discussion where the spouses agree to it, there's no coercion and there's no deceit, spouses should be free to have a sexually open relationship. And he says that frequently this will actually enhance their emotional bond. That one of the reasons that lead to divorces are that spouses are not having their sexual needs fulfilled, inside of marriage, and so they seek sexual outlets outside of marriage. And because they had this unrealistic expectation of sexual exclusivity, when the other spouse finds out about it, their heart's broken. This was adultery, and then they file for divorce. He says, much better that we not link adultery to sexual exclusivity. So long as you're open and honest about it, no one's heart would be broken if you said it's okay to seek out a sexual relationship outside of marriage. That's the monogamish relationship. And then the final term that we came across was the term wed lease. Wed lease is a play on the word wedlock. Wedlock suggests something that is strong and sturdy and permanent. Wed lease stands for the exact opposite. And this was a term that was introduced in the Washington Post. The Washington Post op-ed page is probably the most moderate of liberal publications. And it was published the month after the Supreme Court ruled on the Defense of Marriage Act case. So the timing was convenient. And it was a lawyer writing, and he was saying, just like you can lease a car or you can lease a house, you should be able, legally, to lease a spouse. And the argument here was that he might want to keep the twosome requirement. He might even want to keep the sexual exclusive requirement. He thought the permanent requirement was unrealistic and inhumane. And that the reason that divorce caused so much heartbreak and so much disruption is that spouses had an unrealistic expectation that they were going to live and love one other person for the rest of their life. And when this proved to be impossible, that's when it causes the trouble. But if you only signed up for a wed lease in the first place, if you signed up for a 5 or a 10-year marriage license, which could then be renewed on good behavior, but if it wasn't going well, it would have a natural sunset clause. You know, if after 5 years, no harm, no foul, we only signed up for a wed lease. That's the idea. And again, you see how this, like the monogamish relationship, like the throuple, are all logical entailments of viewing marriage as just about consenting adult romance. Because consenting adult romance can come in as many sizes and shapes as adults can consent to. And if love equals love, there would be no reason for public policy to treat certain sizes and shapes of consenting adult love differently than other sizes and shapes. To do so would be to deny marriage equality to those relationships that are thruples or monogamish or wed leases. Now, I said I wasn't going to say anything about morality or theology or tradition as far as my argument goes in this lecture. But think about the public policy consequence of this. And again, remember, the reason that the government's in the marriage business is not because it's a sucker for romance. Government's not in the marriage business because it cares about my love life. Government's in the marriage business because the sexual union of a man and a woman can produce a child, and that child deserves a mother and a father, and when this doesn't happen, social costs run high. So the government's trying to vindicate and to protect the rights of children and minimize harm to the community as a whole. But the throuple and the wed lease and the monogamish relationship make it more likely that a man has multiple sexual partners in short-lived relationships. That's what a throuple with a wed lease with a monogamish condition attached to it would entail. And so it directly undercuts the public policy purpose of marriage in the first place. And yet all of those further redefinitions follow logically from getting rid of the male-female aspect of marriage. If you say that marriage has nothing to do with the union of a man and a woman and the procreative potential and capacity of that act and of that relationship, then what are you left with for saying that it should be a union permanent and exclusive of twosomes? It seems like you're left with a house of cards. So that's the second consequence. And the primary victim, I should add on to that second consequence, will be children. And so it's interesting that in both the monogamish discussion, the wed lease discussion, and the throuple discussion, the authors themselves, when describing these redefinitions, only spoke about the consenting adults and their love and their union. They never spoke about what this would mean as a whole if society adopted these practices for orderly child rearing. That was an afterthought.